All right, let's go ahead and get started because we have about 45 minutes for us to have a really good time. And I personally enjoy having a good time. I like to party. If I was a runner, I would let you all know some identities that I do not have is that of a runner or a marathoner. I do like to run to the kitchen, but that is all. So I'll introduce myself a little bit more, but let's dive in a little bit. So welcome again. Please, just to make sure that you're in the right place, you should see a banner on your screen. This is the Together We Thrive session. If this is not the right place for you, that's okay. You can literally go anywhere else. We have so many great sessions happening. So feel free to know that you can pick and choose, drop in as you sort of put together your schedule. But my name is Aris, and I will be your facilitator for the next 45 minutes. We're going to have a solid, fun, packed 45 minutes. So I hope you all are ready to communicate with some new people, but also just to sort of communicate with each other and communicate with all of us as a community. So my name is Aris, like I said. There's tons of things on the screen, which I'm actually not going to overview, but I'd like to sort of just share sort of a little bit about my educational background. I'm currently a doctoral candidate at the University of Pittsburgh studying out-of-school learning, which is a fancy, fun word for positive youth development or sort of informal education. So that's currently what I'm doing. Everything else is on there. I'm not going to dive too much into that, but I will share a few fun facts about me. So fun facts, I lived in the Philippines. I have also lived in Hawaii. Both are amazing. Hi, Karen. I also sort of work for 3 amazing organizations. So one of them is AMP Global Youth, which is very similar to sort of what this conference is all about. And it's about sort of building up and amplifying the youth voice. So that's something that I currently do. I also am an adjunct professor at George Washington University, which is based in Washington, D.C. in the U.S. So if you're interested in GW and you want to connect or you want to talk a little bit about what it's like living in D.C. because you're coming to D.C. or you're interested, please, please, please connect with me. And then also, I have studied volcanoes. I currently do nothing with volcanoes, but I have studied volcanoes. That's why I was living in Hawaii. And it was quite a fun time. I didn't go into that as a career choice, but it was really, really cool to sort of learn about some volcanoes. What's the coolest volcano? There was a volcano on the main island in Hawaii, and I'm forgetting the name of it. But like the volcano was active, so it was actively erupting, and they were like, "Go check it out." So we got to like go slightly near it, and then we did see lava. We also saw like a black sand beach, and then at the time, this was in 2009. So I will preference this. This was a long time ago, but I came back with like a little volcano rock, and sometimes I play with it when I am just like stressed. You're not supposed to do that, actually, but it was really cool. I couldn't resist. I was only 14. I had to do it. All right, so that's a little bit about me. Let's sort of move to our warm-up, and we're going to play a really quick game. And this game is called To Be Honest, right? And what I'm going to ask you all to do is relatively pretty simple. You're going to use the chat. I'm going to make it easy for us. This game is pretty simple. I'm going to put up a silly question on your screen. Your job is to answer it as honestly as you can, and that's it, right? And what you're going to do is you're either going to put A or B in the chat, and we'll see sort of how many people are A, how many people are B. The scenarios will change. We'll do a few rounds of this, and then we'll sort of move on. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the chat. You can also request to come on screen if you want to. I can also see that as well, but we don't really have a strong need for that right now. All right, let's get started. Here's question number 1, and I'm like love to see your answers. You were just notified that you have won the lottery. Excuse me. You never have to worry about money again, but in the eyes of the law, you are now legally a dog. Do you keep quiet and take the money, or do you not keep quiet and take the money? What do you think? Are you option A, or are you option B? In the chat, tell me your thoughts. I love how the confetti pops off on the screen. Okay, so I have some option A's. I love it. Option B. Nice. Okay, so pretty equal. A few option A's and a few option B's. I love it. All right. Let's move on to the next one. You've invented teleportation, which is really great, right? You can travel anywhere you want to. Unfortunately, every time you use it, you have to run to the bathroom. Is the convenience of teleportation worth the hassle? What do you think? A, yes. B, no. It's too much. I love how everyone's like, yeah, I mean, I'm good. That is an inconvenience I can handle if I don't have to actually like buy plane tickets, ride the bus, things like that. Okay, I like this group. This is nice. Let's move to our next question. You are 6 weeks into dating someone and it's going great. They get a really good job offer in a cool city all the way across the globe and they ask you to move with them. Are you packing your bags to move with them? A, yes, that's my baby. B, no thank you. We just met. What do you think? Some A's, some B's. Nice. Nice. All right. So mostly B's won that one. I love how A's all for teleportation. There were no B's. For this one, it's like, kind of more B's than A's. All right, then. Thank you all for engaging in that little game and sort of getting started with us, or with me today. Let's sort of dive in. And what I'm going to do for the first sort of 10 minutes of our session is actually talk a little bit about a few leadership models that we're going to be focusing on. And then we're going to go into a breakout group activity, which for the most part will only be about 3 or 4 of you in the group, which is actually really good. You'll be able to connect and then sort of solve an issue using one of the new leadership models that I present to you today. And then after that, we'll come back and then close out. So that's our format for today. We'll keep it pretty simple, pretty light. All right, so let's start off with collective leadership. As you might have seen from this title, we're talking about collective leadership. And what I'm actually going to do today is actually introduce 2 forms of leadership. So you get more for your buck than you actually thought you did. So we're going to talk about collective leadership and also decolonized leadership, which are 2 sort of essential leadership models that do sort of communicate together, which is why we're going to talk about it. But before we do, let's sort of start with a few traditional leadership models that many people sort of know about or have heard more about in their sort of leadership. And the first sort of thing that I do want to start off with is transformational leadership. So I'm going to flip back over to collective in a second. Right? Transformational leadership is all about inspiring change. And you may have heard of this before. You may have sort of like seen this pop up in sort of leadership conferences or sort of leadership sessions or workshops at your school or your community. But transformational leadership is relatively pretty simple, right? It's inspiring and motivating people to sort of create a change around an issue or sort of around something within a community, right? This doesn't have to be movement-based. It can sort of be isolated within actual sort of institutions like schools, for example, but it can also sort of be based in sort of local communities, not sort of national communities. So it really depends, right? But transformational leadership is a leadership model that really does have an effect or sort of works at tons of different levels. A really good example of sort of a transformational leadership in practice is imagine that you are inspiring a group of young people, right? It can be people that are your peers or people that you don't know. Imagine that you're inspiring them to take action on a large-scale social justice campaign. And what you're doing is you're helping them envision the change that they want to see, and you're motivating them to sort of stay the course, right? Even in the face of challenges. And I love that about transformational leadership. You're more sort of pushing people forward and making sure that they know that they can still move forward, right? And they can still sort of create change, and they have the power to create change. But something that transformational leadership doesn't always get right, and that's something that I want you all to notice, is that this type of leadership is still very much centered on one individual leading the overall charge, right? Because if you're pushing people forward, you're standing behind them, right? But you're pushing them forward so that one person is still kind of holding power over the sort of movement or sort of the campaign. The next form of leadership that we have that we're talking about is collective leadership, right? And this is one of our main 2 sort of forms of leadership styles that we're talking about today. And this is all about a shared responsibility, right? And in this model, everyone in a team or community shares responsibility for the outcomes, right? Leadership is not just one person, it's about the entire group, right? The entire community making decisions together, right? Here's a good example for this. I don't know if anyone has heard of Fridays for the Future. Fridays for the Future is a international youth movement for young climate activists, and it was started, I think, after Greta Thunberg began to sort of kind of hop on the sort of scene to sort of begin advocating for climate change. But something that sort of Friday for the Future does really well is that they work with their entire sort of group of students to sort of organize these walkouts. And something that is really, really cool about Fridays for the Future is that on Fridays, they walk out of their classes, right? And that is sort of seen as a sort of movement or sort of a statement about sort of doing something about climate change. So that's an example, collective leadership, a real life example that I like to sort of lead with. All those students do come together within their schools, right, to organize these things without sort of adult intervention. Sometimes adults don't even know, right? But these youth are coming together to sort of share the responsibility of creating change and spreading a message. So these are our first two forms of leadership. Let's move on to our second two. And these hopefully sound familiar or you've heard them before. We have servant leadership and then we have traditional leadership, right? And servant leadership is relatively pretty simple. It's all about prioritizing the needs of others before your own, right? It's about serving others versus serving yourself or sort of just looking out for yourself. And I love, love, love this leadership because it's about prioritizing the needs of a team or a community, right, above your own sort of personal leadership goals or your own career goals. But something that I think is really, really, really important to sort of think about with this is this sort of phrasing of the word need, right? Whenever we think of this term need, we have to kind of also keep in mind that sometimes that can lead us to rely on biases or sort of stigma or generalizations about groups of people, right? Because oftentimes when we think of the word need or needy or sort of people that need something, we might think of sort of different sort of stereotypes that have been sort of perpetuated on media, right? So it's really, really interesting. Servant leadership is great, but when we're only thinking about sort of serving other people's needs, we're actually not giving them the agency to sort of be strong themselves, right? Because we're putting them in the bucket of, you need this thing, versus you already have the power within you. I'm just helping you to sort of strengthen it to sort of create change, right? So servant leadership is good, but at the same time, we have to be careful with our bias to make sure that we're not sort of creating more problems for the people that we want to serve. And then our final leadership that is more traditional is, of course, traditional leadership, right? And traditional leadership is a top-down approach. It's a leadership that most likely you all have sort of seen or experienced at some point in your life. And it's something that we see relatively pretty normal, right? This is in corporate businesses, it's in your school, right? For example, your principal might make all the decisions. And if that's the case, the sort of decisions trickle down, right? Power trickles down. Principal has it, assistant principal, if you have an assistant principal or like an assistant dean, then it might go to the department head or it might go to the teachers after that. But the power sort of trickles down, right? And traditional leadership can be useful depending on the model, right? For example, if you are running a sort of nonprofit organization or NGO, and you're running it by yourself, you would most likely have a traditional form of leadership because you're making all the decisions, you're starting it, you're the founder, you're running it by yourself, right? But as soon as you start to sort of work with communities or you start to bring in more employees, the leadership structure could change or it might not change. It's really up to you. But a good example is a director giving orders to do something versus asking something to be done or sort of working together with the community to do it. So they're sort of directing you to do it versus actually sort of giving the agency to decide. So these are our four sort of traditional styles of leadership that most people have heard of. But before we move on to decolonized leadership, let's pause. I love this GIF. Let's really pause really quickly and take a break. When you think of leadership in your community, what leadership style do you most often see? Feel free to type in the chat. If you don't have an answer, that's a-okay. Okay, top down, traditional, all right. Yeah, traditional for show. I love it. Thank you for giving me that energy. Nice, collective and traditional. Good, okay, so I see a mix of it. Awesome. So let's talk a little bit about decolonized leadership, and then we'll move into our activity. So decolonized leadership is probably the newest form of leadership that you're hearing about, or it's something that you might have heard before in terms of like decolonization. So I do recognize that the term decolonize is a little bit of a buzzword. And by that, I mean it's really popular, but a lot of people say it without really understanding sort of what it particularly means, right? Now, if we were having a conversation about colonization and decolonizing, that would take us another 50 minutes. So we're not going to talk about that theory today. But I do want to sort of introduce sort of what this could look like in leadership form, because we talk a lot about it, but we never sort of know how to actually embody what we talk about. So in general, decolonized leadership is a style that aims to really dismantle power structures and systems of oppression that were created during colonization, right? Many of the systems that we operate in today do come from colonization. So decolonized leadership can be really, really useful when you're looking to solve sort of your issues that you care about, or sort of things like climate change, for example. I think climate change is a really great example of a solution that could really be solved with decolonized leadership. Because when we think about climate change, you also have to think about the fact that a lot of these sort of resources and sort of trash that people are using in sort of the global north ends up in the sort of global south. I don't particularly like those international development terms, but they can be useful when we're trying to share an idea quickly. Right, so when we think about climate change and sort of how it can be sort of exacerbated when we think about trash, but also sort of things like fast fashion, depending on sort of how businesses work with sort of different countries outside of the Western sort of sphere in general, that can actually sort of stem or sort of touch on things that are based or rooted within sort of colonization, right? So for example, the fact that in the US, a lot of our sort of like clothes that we don't use go to sort of the global south in places like the Philippines. They end up getting all of those resources, which they can sell, but a lot of it they also can't use. So then it just piles up all over the place on their island. And it creates sort of climate disasters, or sort of sort of strengthens the climate disasters. It makes them actually stronger, right? If you have a lot of trash built up around your community when a giant wave comes, right, that actually makes it harder for the water to go a lot of places. So it creates more issues for the community as a whole as they try to solve these things. So colonization actually is very, very interesting, because a lot of the issues that we care about are rooted within these practices. Okay, there we go. That's the general overview that I just gave you. There are three essential buckets of decolonized leadership that I want to talk to you about all today, or talk with you all about today. The first one is shared power and inclusive buy-in, right? And I love, love, love this. And I'll give you an example of what this could actually mean. If you were to embody this style of leadership, you might work to ensure that decisions are made collectively with a focus on hearing everyone's voice. However, right, apart from that, you might also work to ensure that everyone gets a chance to host meetings. Everyone gets a chance to create agendas, and everyone gets a chance to sort of set meeting locations, right? For example, maybe this week we're going to Susan's favorite coffee shop. Then next week we're going to Anna's favorite coffee shop. And that's a really, really great way to sort of practice sort of inclusive buy-in and really sharing that power when it comes to sort of decolonized leadership. Right, instead of one person holding all the authority, this style encourages equitable participation and engagement. We then have cultural relevance and respect, right? And within this sort of model, leadership model, this really honors and incorporates the cultural values and traditions of the entire community. And I think this is so, so, so important, because it builds on the knowledge, practices, and wisdom that already exist within the community, right? Versus someone coming in and saying, you're doing this thing. No, right? You could be like, hey, me and my family have lived here for generations. We already know how to work the land. We already know how to sort of solve these issues. We just want the support and the resources, right? So decolonized leadership will sort of very much emphasize really respecting what's already in the community and working to ensure that you're actually sort of respecting it, but also sort of building it up and uplifting it. Here's a good example. If you were to embody this style of leadership, you might work with your community to ensure that decision-making processes are informed by cultural backgrounds and lived experience of the entire people. right? This could also look like multilingual communication, right? So maybe one meeting is in English, one meeting is in Spanish or another language. You could have collaborative planning processes, right? So where everyone's working together to plan forward. We could also make sure that you have many sort of leadership capacity workshops, right? So instead of assuming that people already know how to lead, you can just say, hey, here's a free workshop on it. That way, even if you don't know how to, but you still want to get involved, you still can. You could also sort of have informal presentation styles. So instead of a PowerPoint like this, maybe you just have everybody together sharing stories about their week and sort of sharing how that connects to what you're interested in talking about. So these are just a few examples that you can actually use. Then the final tenet that we have is healing and strengthening, right? So decolonized leadership focuses on healing just as much as it does finding a solution. And I cannot emphasize this enough. Restorative practices in leadership in this sort of format and within this model is all about growth, resilience, and emotional well-being for all members of the community, right? And this tenet really emphasizes that finding a solution must also prioritize rebuilding from past injustices, right? Something I like to say is that the systems that we live in are not broken. The systems that we live in are actually working exactly the way that they were designed to work. It's now 2024, you know? And if the system was built in the 1900s, it's kind of out of date because times have changed. Things have changed, right? So systems aren't broken. They're working the way that they actually were designed to work. It's just they haven't been updated. So how can we rework and restructure these systems to sort of fit the needs of community? And that's what I love about healing and strengthening, right? Because we can't do that without acknowledging that there were past injustices committed to these communities, right? Something that I like to say is it's impossible to create sustainable solutions when we're ignoring the fact that trauma exists, right? If we're going to solve an issue, we have to solve it holistically. We can't just solve what we see. So here's an example of it. If you were to embody this style of leadership, you might work with your community to repair damage done by conflict, right? Rather than simply punishing wrongdoers. So for example, let's say someone on your leadership team stole some money from the community, right? Instead of just punishing that person, you could work to actually restore the trust back with the community, right? Bring the community in for a town hall session, have people share how it felt to sort of have them lose that trust or sort of to be betrayed, and then sort of work together to solve the issue together. This could also sort of include utilizing trauma-informed practices. Maybe you are describing leadership more as a journey rather than an innate skill, right? Leadership is a journey. Everyone can be a leader. It's just you're on your journey, and that's okay. And then also maybe you're encouraging healthy boundaries and self-care. And my favorite, you're celebrating progress versus completion. And I love, love, love that so much when it comes to youth advocacy. It's okay if you don't reach your goal, but if you made progress, that's still a reason to celebrate, right? And that's something that I love about this leadership model. All right, so my friends, whew, that's so many great things. Something that I just makes me happy to talk about these things and to talk about sort of how they all connect. Decolonized leadership also means a lot to me because I identify as an African American man, but also a Native American man. So decolonized leadership is a really great form of leadership because it really does pull from traditional indigenous practices of leadership, which is just great. You know, we're including more voices in sort of leadership, and we're looking at the past to sort of influence how we move forward in the future. So that's why I love it. This is sort of something I already mentioned, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. But remember that finding a solution must also prioritize rebuilding from past injustices, right? You're not just looking for a solution to climate change, right? You're looking to sort of see how people have been affected in the past, and you're looking to sort of see how they can now be sort of pushed forward and sort of rebuilt, or the community can be rebuilt as we solve the issue in itself. I actually don't work on climate change. I just like talking about it because it's really important. All right, let's move on. So this is just a reflection question. I love my little gifts, my little gifts or my little gifs, depending on how you want to say it. But with this being said, right, we looked at all of those different forms of leadership. right? How can these different leadership styles really affect your ability to create change in your community, right? And I'm not going to ask you all to answer this in the chat, but I do want you all to sort of just think about it on the back end, right? As you're reflecting on the leadership styles that exist in your community, how can you actually embody these sort of models to bring back to your towns and to the issues that you're working on? All right, let's now move to our practice lab, which I'm really excited about. We have about 20-ish minutes left, so we'll spend about 15 minutes doing this, and then we'll close out with the final 5 minutes and wrap up and talk about some key takeaways. All right, so here's what you're going to do as a breakout group, and I may I might make 2 breakout groups. So there's about 8 of you here. Well, 7. So we'll have a few breakout groups, so we'll see. So what you're going to do is you'll have about 15 minutes to do 2 things. And you should be able to see each other in your breakout groups and connect and share more about yourselves, share where you're from. So that's the first thing you're going to do, right? You and your group should use your initial time to introduce yourselves, right? And share a little bit about your leadership style, right? If you have a particular leadership style that you like, talk about it. Are you more of a collective leader, traditional leader, decolonized leader? You can use those terms if you want. Yes, I can list them. You can use those terms if you want, but you can also not worry about them. And I love how you're like 1 step ahead of me at all times. This is why you're my friend. This is something that you don't particularly have to sort of use those definitions, right? You can use the terminology and the language that you are familiar with. So don't worry about the leadership styles that I gave you. You can just sort of talk about how you lead. That's okay. And then after that, I want you to identify a current challenge facing youth today. This can be anything: mental health, loneliness, access to education, access to menstrual products. Also, fun fact, today's Purple Day, which in the domestic violence sort of advocacy movement is the day that we sort of wear purple to sort of show our sort of allyship and to raise awareness around domestic and dating violence. So if you didn't know that today, that's another good reason why you should be happy about this advocacy conference. You're literally advocating on an advocacy awareness building day. All right, so that's the first thing. After that, you're going to use the remaining time to discuss how the issue, or excuse me, to discuss how decolonized or collective leadership styles can help you and your group solve the issue that you highlighted before, right? Yes, it is, Karen. I'm very excited about it. So, for example, if in the first step you select mental health as an issue affecting youth, in the second step, you're going to work with your breakout group to see how decolonized or collective leadership, it doesn't have to be decolonized if that doesn't feel right, right? Do what feels well to you and use what fits. But I want you all to describe how you could solve that issue using that leadership style. And within that, think about decision making. What would decision making look like? What would team input look like? Maybe what are some restorative practices that you could sort of model to your community or bring to your community if you wanted to solve those issues? How would you engage stakeholders, right? And stakeholders are people that sort of like will be affected by the solution that you're building. That's a pretty nice way to summarize it. And then community collaboration. How would you collaborate with communities? And then we'll come back together, we'll talk a little bit about it, and then we'll wrap up. All right. Does anyone have any questions? Feel free to put them in the chat before we all head to our breakout spaces. All right, cool. Looks like everyone's good. I'm going to give you all 2 rooms, and I'll give you about, let's do 10 minutes. So 5 minutes for the first step, 5 minutes for the step after. Here we go. Okay, my friends, let's wrap up and close out for the remaining of our time. We have a few minutes left. We were going to talk about what you all just did together. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. That's okay, though. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and I will also put my email in the chat. I'll give you all my GW email. if you all would like to sort of connect with me there. But just a few key takeaways before we get out of here in 2 minutes. It's kind of crazy. Where'd the time go? I want more time. I want to hang out with y'all. Like, I want to bring all of y'all on camera and be like, let's tell me about what you're doing. But a few key takeaways, right? Remember that I gave you 2 for 1. So instead of just collective leadership, I also gave you decolonized leadership. So you can choose which one you want to sort of embody, embrace. It's really up to you. But I like to give people options. So the first one, decolonized leadership. Remember, this is a leadership style that aims to dismantle power structures and systems of oppression created by colonization, right? And remember that many of the issues that we're all collectively working to solve are fueled by some form of historical colonization. That's a mouthful what I just told you. So if you want to talk more about it and or how like issues that you're working on could be sort of affected by colonization, please feel free to connect with me. And then a collective leadership, which again, it's a style that emphasizes a shared responsibility, right? Everybody within a community shares power and they have control over how the community works to solve an issue. Both models can help advocates and leaders address challenges by fostering inclusion, amplifying marginalized voices, and creating a sense of belonging. Like really, when it comes to movement building, everyone must feel like they actually belong. So with that, my friends, thank you all for joining me for 50 minutes. This was so fun. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. I will stick around for a few. It looks like we have a little bit of a break, so I don't want to take too much of your break. If you want to connect on Instagram, you can. If you want to connect on LinkedIn, it's Aris Hines, and then my email is also in the chat. So thank you all for joining. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I hopefully will connect with you soon.